Yes, guys, and welcome back to the Cannon podcast. I hope you're all doing well. Hope you're all good. I'm certainly good, especially with the way Arsenal are playing in recent weeks. The last couple of results have certainly been very positive, and I think Arsenal fans, it's become a little bit less toxic for sure on social media and just in general. So it's pretty good times at the moment. And I'm even more excited by the fact that this is episode 2 of the Data Pod. And as we alluded to previously, this is a show that is going to be happening monthly towards the end of the month, in which we're going to be getting our teeth stuck into all the different types of metrics that are interesting, new metrics that we want to explore as well. And I want to reiterate that I want you guys to give your input, your feedback on anything that you'd like us to look at in future podcasts. And that's something that we want to keep as a staple of this specific podcast. We want to continue to grow. We want to keep looking at certain metrics, but we want to explore into different ideas as well that could be really interesting to look at. And with me, I've got the wonderful George. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. Yeah, thank you, Rohan. Always a pleasure to chat with you as well. And yeah, I'm really happy. I mean, at the time of recording is the day after the Sporting massacre. And I thought it was a fantastic performance, and it's definitely, there feels like good vibes around Arsenal again, which is always really, really important and nice to see.
Definitely, and I think it is a good time. And I alluded to in a podcast that I felt Arsenal needed to remind people that they are still a very good football team, and we've done that. Now there's more different tests to come in terms of the longevity of being able to go on a run, but so far, the last couple of games have been really positive. And I do want to reiterate that this podcast, if you want to access the entirety of the show, you can access it via becoming a Patreon or YouTube member. And there is a link below within the description. If you're interested in that sort of content, then become a member. And give us your feedback as always, and anything that you'd like us to look at in future podcasts. So without further ado, today we want to look at something a little bit different. We want to look at squad usage. And George, as always, has created some very interesting graphics that we're going to get our teeth stuck into. Would you mind sharing that, George?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Is that coming through? I think so, yeah.
That has came through, yeah.
There we are. So, very briefly. So for those who might have missed the first episode, or maybe just to reiterate quickly, this is the Cannon Podcast Data Center. We haven't come up with a better name from it since last month, but effectively is getting data from mainly FBref. And what I'm doing with it is just putting it into different views and really helping to kind of shape a discussion, get insights, and things like that. For this part, one of the areas I've been quite keen on is around squad usage. I think particularly the context where it came from was it felt a lot that Arsenal were quite reliant on a core number of players, and particularly the most used players, or the most frequently selected players, so the starting 11. And so what I've presented here in this initial view is just looking as a percentage of the minutes that have been played in the Premier League this season. What is that kind of share? And I've divided it across the most used 11 to then what I'd then refer to as more of the kind of core squad. So you're 12 to 18. And then any other players above that is their share there as well. I think it's been quite interesting, particularly when you stack it against City and Liverpool. And a lot of these views are deliberately putting Arsenal against City and Liverpool for obviously the context of us being title rivals. And at this stage, and it was quite similar, and maybe we'll go into it to last season, but I think Arsenal is still in a position where the majority of the minutes is still being used within the kind of the most used 11. And so, compared to City and Liverpool, who are around 72%, and that was similar to last season as well. It feels, we're at least with what the data showing so far, still the majority of the minutes are going to a smaller group of players. And I don't know if that's something that you've seen, Rohan, or something that you're surprised to see, but
It's kind of how I expected it at this stage of the season, to be honest. I think one thing I do want to look at is as the season progresses and we then start to see more fixtures start to pile up. I'd like to see us start to share those minutes a little bit better. Now, at the moment, I think you're looking at the numbers; it's very similar across all teams, really.
Yeah,
But if you look at last season, and if you could switch on last season's toggle, actually, George,
yeah, of
um,
course.
this is where I find it a little bit more interesting because if you look at Arsenal's, it's that 78% relative to Manchester City's 76%. I still think that is enough of a difference that we can certainly improve on in order for us to use the squad more. And I think that one of the big things about Mikel Arteta is his squad management. And I think the difference between him and Pep Guardiola is the fact that Mikel Arteta values continuity a lot. But at the same time, I think whilst that's a really good thing because you're able to kind of allow the team to flow, and we've seen it in our last couple of games against Sporting and West Ham. Obviously, we made changes, but when we've had certain players available, and ready and fit, the flow of the game's really good. And Mikel tends to always pick those players. But I think as the season goes on, we're going to need to be able to become even more willing to use our squad. And I found it interesting as well, looking at Liverpool last season in particular, where 66.7%, of the most used 11 sharing those minutes there, and they do tend to go a little bit more into other areas within their squad. And I'll find that interesting as the season goes on for them, because when you look at Liverpool and their success so far this season, I'd argue that having those staples there, those staples across the entirety of their spine, the likes of Konate, Van Dijk, and you've obviously got Mohamed Salah. It'd be interesting to see as they start to rotate more, will that impede their performance? Because I think right now the continuity that they've had has really helped them. Now, some may argue, they've had injuries to Alisson. I think it's only is it Alisson? I think
Yeah,
Trent's recently picked up an injury as well. But once the season goes on, I'd be very interested to see what they do. But from Arsenal's perspective, I think this is something to keep an eye on for sure as the season
I
goes
think
on.
so,
And I
yeah. Availability is obviously going to be another component. Um,
exactly, yeah,
there's been a few suspensions in our team, but it doesn't seem like enough to cause a big dent in that. And then I think actually some of the other interesting areas was then breaking down the total minutes, total league minutes, but into age brackets as well. And I think this is a really nice way just to demonstrate the various age profiles of the three contenders at the moment. It's quite interesting, I suppose, at least with Arsenal, that you're still operating with a lot of what I would say kind of pre-peak players,
yeah,
um, and a high share of kind of minutes between these few here as well. And then I guess I suppose if we compare it to last season as well, there's actually in terms of our over 30 bracket, the amount of game time that Thomas Partey's been getting is certainly deserved, but maybe also a bit of a surprise when how many
yeah,
different
absolutely,
options we've had there. And then I guess as a visual comparison to City, you can still see just the reliance of players who are not just over 30, but in some cases are getting a bit more
yeah,
considerably over 30 as
yeah.
well. And I think there's some really interesting context about sort of the direction of all of these teams, particularly when through the lens of this different age profiles. What are your thoughts with that?
Yeah, I mean, this is very interesting because obviously Man City going through significant adversity at the moment. 4 losses and 1 draw in their last 5 games, or is it 5 losses and 1 draw? It might be 5 actually.
5 in a row,
Um,
I think. Yeah,
yeah, 5, and then obviously managing to capitulate from a 3-0 lead and finishing 3-0 against Feyenoord yesterday. But I do find this very interesting in terms of if we're looking at Manchester City's squad and their rebuild. I always think when you're winning trophies, people won't necessarily look at the flaws around the club, and I get that because obviously winning, the success that they've had in the Pep Guardiola era. Who am I to question what they're doing there in terms of from a footballing point of view? But when I look at the games this season, what we've seen, they've looked very leggy,
mm-hmm.
and they've looked very troubled in transition in particular. And I also think their pressing as well. they're mistiming their jumps, and that's allowing teams to really capitalize and find those spaces, as Spurs did most recently. And you can see, over 41%, of their squad
It's the majority of
is in
players.
that bracket.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it does raise question marks over their squad rebuild and whether City are going to be able to go through the season and have one of those big runs that we kind of always associate with them. I've always caveated the Rodri injury as being something that's certainly going to impede them a lot. But outside of that as well, in terms of other players that they have, they brought Gundogan in, they brought him back to the club. He looks very leggy. I don't think he is the same type of player that we've been accustomed to during his time at Man City. And I do think that, we'll get into it actually in the full show as well about going into the details. And I think you've got an interesting thoughts on City still being a significant threat. And I'd argue they are a threat, but I don't think that they are going to be able to reach the levels that they did last season. And that gives me confidence in that relative to Man City. But yeah, I think that Arsenal, I didn't expect anything less. When we look at the rebuild that we've done, we look at the priority of players within that 20 to 25 age bracket. And if you looked at previous Edu interviews as well that he's done, he said that the club prioritizes young talent to grow that talent. And we're only going to prioritize players of above age of 26 if they're able to deliver an impact right now, and I didn't expect anything different from Arsenal and Liverpool as well. I think Liverpool are going to be in an interesting situation in the summer with the contract situations of Van Dijk, Salah, and Trent in particular. But in that over 30 bracket, Van Dijk, that's and Mohamed Salah, those two they're all timers in the Premier League in my opinion, and it'll be interesting there.
I have a couple of quick thoughts on that as well. I mean, I think the other piece of recent news was Pep signing an extension, and it's only a short extension. And again, I think the motives around that could be anything as well. But I think in the context of the age profile of Man City, and particularly arguably in a period where they need to do rebuild, I think there was a certain expectation. It feels like this is maybe my tin pot theory or like tinfoil theory. But again, why Arsenal were really developing more of a pre-peak squad was also in mind that Man City's kind of squad cycle was also, coming, on more of a decline, and whether Pep would be staying around a long time. And, there's, a lot of thought, feeling that when Pep leaves, that there will be a decline at Man City. And it feels like a lot of the squad management with Arsenal, particularly when it comes to the age profile of players, has been really designed to fill those shoes when the time comes as well. So I see this as quite healthy for what it is. And, it's not the only reason that Man City are having been struggling with the results of late, because they've got aging players, but it certainly...
It does play a part for sure. And I think when we're talking about the biggest weaknesses that we've seen in Man City so far this season, in my opinion, it is out of possession. And I've said they've looked quite leggy, and you can certainly attribute a fair bit to that in terms of the way that they're using their squad, and that over 30 bracket being their biggest portion of minutes going into that. So,
and very quickly, just to bring it back to Arsenal before maybe we show the last few, is just the lack of representation at this stage of kind of under 21 and youth players. Yeah. And I think what I'm quite interesting with this is obviously Ethan and Miles Lewis-Skelly have been given game time, and I think their minutes will be managed. Some people might say more, some people might say less.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting is there is a sort of lack of age profiles from sort of 18 to 21 within the squad, and actually this is quite a sort of hollow area in terms of the youth prospects who will be entering this bucket in a few years' time as well. So I wanted to also raise that as well.
Definitely. And I think the next one is to look at is, and you look at Man City's as well. That is something in which, you could argue Arsenal could do more in, but I'm not overly fussed by that at the moment, as long as I do see more minutes to Ethan Nwaneri, in particular. That's something, again, we'll have to see as the season develops, and the trust that goes into.
And then the last few is then comparing at a player level each of the different league minutes. So that's the red bar, all the minutes played. And then I've mapped that against weekly wage. And I think the key thing around here is around sort of availability and obviously distribution of minutes, and then also kind of using the wage as a sort of proxy of what's their kind of cost on the books. And there's various reasons why players aren't playing and things like that. Injuries and things like that. That's obviously where Martin Odegaard, for instance, his minutes have been obviously quite low as a kind of significant earner in the squad as well. But I mean, I looked at this and there's a few sort of areas, and it's been the same maybe for last season as well. But Gabriel Jesus is a very high earner within the squad.
Yeah.
Really getting the minutes to kind of that reflect that. I don't know your thoughts.
This is where it does get a little more interesting, and I think when you're looking at, I mean, I'm looking at those players in which we're paying big wages for, but we're not necessarily using them enough for a number of different reasons. And as you've already alluded to, injuries are a big caveat here. But in terms of Gabriel Jesus, I think that this is a player that I've criticised quite heavily recently, and it's actually quite funny because as a player I absolutely loved as well. Before his injury in the 2022 World Cup, and also when he was at Man City, he's a player that I really wanted. But I look at Gabriel Jesus and I look at the wages that we put him on, and as you can see, the line graph is representing the wages, and the bar chart is the minutes played. You're seeing, a significant difference in terms of the minutes played relative to the wages. That is a massive jump. And as the season goes on, I think that it's very important that we do get a return of investment from players like Gabriel Jesus, but also from someone like Zinchenko as well. I think Zinchenko, again, injuries are a caveat there, but I think when we're looking at those higher earners, whilst fans may not be, overly keen on XYZ, but we still need to use XYZ, in my opinion, if we're going to be able to have a successful season because of the number of games that we've got. But right now, it's not great reading for Gabriel Jesus. I think Thomas Partey, for example, is a very good example of a player that is complete. It's a complete contrast to last season. I mean, if you show last season's graphic, I'd assume Thomas Partey's would be again very. Yeah, you can see there, can't you? In terms of minutes played relative to his weekly wage, it's a pretty big jump. Whereas this season, his availability has been fantastic, and I'd argue his form post Atalanta as well. Atalanta away, he's been definitely our best midfielder. So yeah, this is again another one to keep an eye on. But I'm looking more at those players like the Gabriel Jesus's, like the Jorginhos as well, who I think we should use a little bit more as well. I thought he was fantastic against Forest. And Raheem Sterling as well. We'll have to wait and see on that one. But it's interesting.
I think you're right. I mean, I guess to conclude with all of these different views, when you're looking at the kind of share minutes, the distribution in the different age profiles, and then the minutes across sort of, the players and who's earning what, it's something to keep our eye on. I sort of put this view initially together around the transfer window and just thinking of players, because last season, it was easy to forget that sort of Nketiah was on 100,000, I believe, and other players like this, and just weren't getting the game minutes. So I think it's something to keep our eye on for sure.
Certainly, and we'll leave it there for the YouTube. I hope you guys have enjoyed that small segment of what we're looking to kind of achieve with this specific podcast. We're looking to try and go into all sorts of different things that can give us a bit more of an understanding of what we're doing both on the pitch, off the pitch, how we're using certain players. And what we do also want to mention is that if this is something that interests you guys, being able to access the data center, please leave a comment and please reach out if that is something that certainly does intrigue you, excite you, and we'll certainly try and get that in the works as well. This is something that, as I've already mentioned, we've only done, this is our second podcast, but we want to branch out. We want to make it very user friendly, and we want you guys to be the drivers of being able to shape this podcast, and in order for us to make it the best possible version that it can be. So yeah, if you like this video, please give it a like, please share, please subscribe. And like I alluded to, we're going to go on record an extra 45 minutes looking at different metrics, and you can access that via becoming a Patreon or YouTube member. So we're going to head over there. Any closing thoughts, George?
No, it's great. I think you've captured everything. I'm really excited to be again involved with Canon
Yeah,
Podcast, and I think to be able to profile these types of insights
yeah,
is fantastic. And but it's going to be a journey as well. I think it's being really receptive to
yeah.
feedback and comments about interesting views. And yeah, I think it's a very exciting kind of future for this area of the Canon Podcast.
Absolutely love that. George is a legend. He's created this all, and yeah, it's just great. And we're going to be looking to make it even better as each week passes. So yeah, we'll leave it there. Thank you guys for tuning in. Arsenal are smashing it at the moment. They'll keep smashing it, and I'm just very excited. But yeah, for now, we'll leave it there, and make sure you thanks for keeping Arsenal.